Hi everyone, if you love my channel, please support me with a like, a subscribe, and a share.
The shower thought that broke me. You know that strange moment when you're standing under hot water, half asleep, and your brain suddenly decides to remind you of something you've been avoiding for months? That happened to me last Tuesday. I was scrubbing my hair, thinking about absolutely nothing, which, for an overthinker like me, is already suspicious. And then a quiet voice inside said, "You still haven't filed your first US tax return." I froze. Not because the water turned cold, but because my chest felt like someone had dropped a bowling ball into it. 3 years in America. 3 years of learning how to order coffee without panicking, how to smile at neighbors even when I didn't understand their jokes, how to pretend I belonged here. And yet, a piece of paper with boxes and numbers could still make me feel like a fraud. That's the thing nobody tells you about immigrating. It's not the big moments that break you. It's the small, boring, bureaucratic ones. The ones where you have to prove, on paper, that your life here is real. So there I was, dripping on the bath mat, thinking, I'd rather clean the toilet than open that envelope from the IRS. And that thought scared me more than any tax form ever could. Because I realized I was still running away from English. Not the fun English, not the hello, how are you English, but the real, sticky, adult English that asks you to be responsible, to be accountable, to be seen. And if you've ever felt that weight, the exhaustion of trying to learn a language while also trying to build a life, a marriage, a family, all in a country that isn't yours, then you already know why I almost gave up right there in the shower. But let me rewind a little. Because this story isn't really about taxes. It's about the moment I stopped being afraid of English and started falling in love with it. And yes, I know how ridiculous that sounds, falling in love with a language. That's the kind of thing people say in motivational posters, not in real life, but stay with me. Because 3 years ago, I was the person who would hide in the bathroom during parties so I wouldn't have to make small talk. I was the person who read the same email 10 times before hitting send, then panicked for an hour afterward. I was the person who told my husband, "I'll never sound like them," and meant it as a fact, not a fear. And then something happened, something so small and stupid and beautiful, that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in early April. The sky was that weird California orange pink, and I was sitting on our worn-out couch, staring at a letter from the IRS. My husband, who is American but has the patience of a saint, put a cup of tea next to me and said, "You know, in this country, taxes are kind of like love letters." I laughed. I actually snorted. Love letters, it's a bill, not a poem. But he shook his head. No, think about it. You write down everything you've earned, everything you've given, and then you send it to the government to say, "Hey, I'm part of this place. I'm contributing. I'm here." I wanted to argue, but my throat got tight. Because for the first time, someone had taken something terrifying, a pile of English words like withholding, deduction, dependent, and turned it into a story about belonging. That night, I didn't open the letter. But I didn't hide it either. I left it on the coffee table, face up, like a challenge. And the next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old English notebook. Not to study grammar, not to memorize vocabulary. I just wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page. What if I learn English by telling my own story? I didn't know it then, but that sentence was the first step out of the hole I'd been digging for myself. See, here's the secret that no language app will tell you. Your brain is not a machine. It doesn't learn by repetition alone. It learns by emotion, by meaning, by survival. And when you're an immigrant, everything feels like survival. Every phone call, every form, every time you mispronounce squirrel and people laugh, your nervous system treats it like a threat. That's why you feel exhausted after a 10-minute conversation. That's why you want to crawl into bed instead of opening that email. You're not lazy. You're not dumb. Your brain is just trying to protect you from what it thinks is danger. But here's the trick. You can rewire that response. Not by forcing yourself to study harder, but by attaching your English practice to something that already matters to you, something like love, or marriage, or the strange pride of paying your first tax bill. So let me ask you directly, because I know why you clicked on this video. You're tired of fake dialogues about John going to the supermarket. You're tired of repeating the cat sits on the mat until you want to scream. You want to learn English the way humans actually learn, through stories that make you feel something. And that's exactly what we're going to do together. Over the next 12 parts, I'm going to tell you the real story of my first US tax return, how it went from being my biggest fear to my proudest moment. I'll speak slowly, clearly, and repeat key phrases so your ears can catch them naturally. You don't need to take notes. You don't need to pause. Just listen. Just let the story wash over you the way that shower water washed over me. And by the end, I promise you won't see taxes the same way. And you might, just might, start to see English as something that belongs to you, too. But first, let me tell you about the night I almost threw away that IRS envelope. Because that's where the real lesson hides. Why I almost quit English again. Let me take you back to a night that still makes my stomach clench when I think about it. It was my second winter in America, and I was standing in the frozen food aisle of a Walmart in Ohio, holding a bag of something called tater tots. And I had no idea what they were. That sounds silly, I know, it's just potatoes. But in that moment, surrounded by boxes and bags with words I'd never seen before, casserole, broth, muffin mix, I felt something crack inside me. I had studied English for years in my home country. I had passed tests. I had memorized verb tables until 2 a.m. And yet here I was, a grown woman, unable to answer the cashier when she cheerfully asked paper or plastic, because I didn't know the difference. I just stood there, frozen, while people behind me shifted their weight and sighed. The cashier repeated herself slowly, like I was a child. And I smiled, that horrible, tight smile that immigrants know too well, and pointed at the cheapest bag. When I got to my car, I didn't cry. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, and whispered to myself, maybe I'm not meant to be here. That was the first time I almost quit English. Not the language itself, but the exhausting, humiliating process of trying to learn it as an adult. You see, there's a special kind of loneliness that comes when you can't express who you really are. In my native language, I was funny. I was quick. I could argue, flirt, comfort, and joke without thinking. But in English, I was slow. I was quiet. I was the person who laughed a little too late because I was still translating the punchline. My husband would try to include me in conversations with his friends, but by the time I had formed a sentence, the topic had changed. So I stopped trying. I started saying I'm fine to everything. And slowly, I began to disappear. The second time I almost quit was even worse. It was at a parent-teacher conference for my oldest child, who had just started kindergarten. The teacher, a kind woman with glasses, said something like, your son is very creative, but we're noticing some behavioral issues during group reading. And I understood every word separately, but together, they swirled into a blur. I nodded and smiled for 10 minutes, then walked out and called my husband crying because I didn't know if my child was in trouble or if the teacher had complimented him. That night, I told him, I can't do this. I can't be the mother who doesn't understand what's happening at school. I can't be the wife who hides in the kitchen during parties. I should just go back. And he, bless his imperfect, beautiful heart, didn't try to fix it. He just held me and said, you're not broken. The system is just not made for people like us. But we can break it together. I didn't believe him, not then. Because when you're in that dark place, nothing sounds true except the voice that says you're not enough. The voice that whispers, everyone else learned English faster. Everyone else is braver. You're the problem. And here's the science part that would have saved me months of misery if I'd known it. Your brain has a built-in alarm system called the amygdala. When you feel threatened, And yes, social embarrassment counts as a threat. It floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline. That's great if you're running from a tiger. But it's terrible if you're trying to learn a new language. Because language learning requires a calm, curious, playful brain. It requires making mistakes and laughing at them. But when you're constantly afraid of being judged, your brain literally shuts down the parts responsible for memory and processing. You're not stupid. You're just in survival mode, and you can't learn when you're fighting for your life. That's why traditional methods don't work for so many of us. Flashcards, grammar drills, apps that punish you for wrong answers, they only feed the fear. What we need is safety. We need stories that don't judge us. We need to hear the same phrase multiple times, not because we're slow, but because that's how the brain builds new pathways. Repetition without shame, that's the secret. And that's why I want you to forget everything you've been told about studying English. You're not studying. You're listening to a friend tell you a story. You're allowed to miss words. You're allowed to replay this video 10 times. Your only job right now is to let your ears relax and follow the thread. Because what happened next, the thing that pulled me out of that dark spiral, was so unexpected, so small, that I almost missed it. A few days after that terrible parent-teacher night, I found an old envelope in my husband's desk. It wasn't from the IRS. It was from me. A letter I had written to myself 6 months earlier, before we moved to the US, in my own language. It said, "Don't forget why you're doing this. You're not moving for money. You're moving for love." And love is a language you already speak. I read it 3 times, and then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened a new notebook and wrote, in English, 1 sentence. "Today I am scared, but I am still here." That sentence was not perfect. The grammar was probably wrong, but it was mine. And in that moment, I stopped trying to sound like a native speaker. I stopped trying to impress anyone. I just started telling the truth. And that, my friend, is where everything changed. The letter that changed everything, the envelope was white, thin, and completely ordinary. No red stamps, no bold warnings, no handwriting that screamed urgent. Just my name and address in a tiny font, and in the top left corner, for letters that made my heart stop, IRS. I had heard stories about the IRS. People joked about them like they were boogeymen in suits. "Don't mess with the IRS," my coworker had said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "They can take your house, your car, even your future." So when I saw that envelope sitting on our kitchen counter, sandwich it between a pizza coupon and a crayon drawing from my daughter, I felt the same cold wash of fear I used to feel before big exams, except worse, because this time there was no passing grade. This was real. This was America asking me to prove something I wasn't sure I could prove. I picked it up with 2 fingers, like it might bite me, and carried it to the couch. My husband was washing dishes, his back turned, humming some old song. I wanted to hide the letter, throw it away, pretend it never came. But my hands wouldn't move, so I just sat there, staring at those 3 letters, IRS, and my mind started spinning worst-case scenarios. What if I had done something wrong on that half-finished tax form I started last week? What if they knew I was still unsure about some of the words? What if they sent me back? That last thought hit me like a punch to the chest. Because underneath all the fear about taxes, underneath all the confusion about deductions and credits, there was a much deeper fear, the fear that I didn't really belong here, and that one day, someone in an official building would agree. My husband must have sensed something, because he turned off the water, dried his hands, and walked over. He didn't grab the envelope. He just sat down next to me and said, "You know you don't have to open it today, right?" I shook my head. "If I don't open it now, I'll never open it." So he nodded, and together, like 2 kids about to peek inside a haunted house, we opened the letter. And here's where the story gets strange. Inside was not a bill, not a penalty notice, not a threatening letter with red ink. Inside was a single piece of paper, simple, friendly instruction sheet titled How to File Your First Tax Return as a New Resident. It had a cartoon eagle on the corner, for God's sake. The language was slow, clear, and almost gentle. It said things like, if you earned money last year, you will need to tell us how much. Don't worry, we will help you find the right forms. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the trap. But there was no trap. Just a small paragraph at the bottom that said, Welcome to the United States. We know taxes can be confusing for everyone, especially newcomers. Please call this number if you have questions. We have interpreters in many languages. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, a weird, shaky laugh that came from somewhere between relief and disbelief. All that fear, all those sleepless nights. All that energy spent avoiding this moment, and the IRS had sent me a letter that basically said, It's okay, we'll figure it out together. My husband looked at me, and he smiled that slow, knowing smile of his. See, he said, I told you, taxes in America are like love letters. Love letters, I snorted again, but softer this time. How do you figure that? He took the paper from my hands and pointed at the word welcome. Think about it, he said. You don't send a love letter to someone you don't care about. You send it because you want them to know you see them, you value them, you want to build something with them. That's what taxes are here. It's not just the government taking your money. It's you saying, I am part of this place. I am contributing to the roads, the schools, the libraries, the parks. I am helping take care of my new home. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that taxes are about numbers, not feelings. But something in his words unlocked a door I didn't know I had been trying to open. For 3 years, I had felt like a guest in this country, someone who borrowed things but never owned them, someone who used the roads but never paid for them, someone who benefited from the system but wasn't really part of it. And here was a piece of paper from the most feared agency in America, telling me that my small contribution mattered, that I was allowed to be here, that my money, even the tiny amount I earned from my part-time job, was wanted. That's when I understood what my husband meant by love letter. A love letter doesn't have to be romantic. It just has to be honest. It says, here is what I have. Here is what I can give. I hope it's enough. I hope you'll accept it. And in that moment, holding that IRS instruction sheet, I realized that filing my taxes wasn't about fear anymore. It was about pride. Small, quiet, trembling pride. The kind you feel when you finally say, I love you after being scared for months. The kind you feel when you stop hiding and start showing up. I didn't file that night. But I did something just as important. I put the letter on the fridge, right next to my daughter's drawing. And every time I walked past it, I whispered to myself, you belong here. You belong here. You belong here. It felt fake at first, like a lie I was trying to believe. But after a week, the words started to feel less like a whisper and more like a fact. And that, my friend, is how a boring government letter became the most unexpected gift of my immigrant life. Because sometimes, the thing you're most afraid of is actually the thing that's been waiting to welcome you home. Love across the climates. Do you remember your wedding day? I remember mine like a fever dream, not because of the dress or the flowers, but because of the heat. We got married in Vietnam in July, which anyone who has been there will tell you is like standing inside a dragon's mouth. The air was thick and wet, the kind of humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin within seconds. My husband, then my fiancé, had flown in from Ohio, where July is also hot, but a different kind of hot, dry, predictable. The kind of hot you can escape by stepping into the shade. But Vietnamese heat, it follows you, it wraps around you. It becomes part of the conversation. And there he was, my American man, sweating through his suit, fanning himself with the wedding program, trying to smile while his body screamed, "What is this place?" I watched him from across the room, and I felt a strange mix of love and worrying. Because if he couldn't handle the weather, how would he handle everything else? The food, the language, the way my mother expressed love by forcing him to eat 7 bowls of soup. That's the thing about marrying across cultures. People talk about love conquering all, but they forget that love has to conquer small things first, like humidity. Like the fact that my family eats rice for breakfast and his eats cereal. Like the way we argue loud, emotional, dramatic, while his family argues quietly with long pauses and careful words. On our wedding night, after all the guests had left and the air finally cooled slightly, we sat on the hotel balcony and he said something I will never forget. He said, "I thought I knew you. But tonight, watching you with your family, I realized I've only seen the version of you that speaks English. The real you, the one who laughs with her aunts, who teases her cousins, who cries at the toast, that you speaks a different language. And I want to learn it," I cried, of course. Because he had named the very thing I was afraid of. When you move to another country, you don't just lose your language. You lose the rhythm of your jokes, the shortcuts of your arguments, the softness of your lullabies. You become a simpler version of yourself, flattened like a pressed flower. And you wonder, does the person who loves you now love the real you, or just the English version? That question haunted me for years. It crept into our marriage during small moments when I couldn't find the word for guilt and said sad instead. When I laughed at the wrong time because I missed a cultural cue. When I got frustrated and yelled in my native language and he just looked confused. We fought about money, about parenting, about whose family to visit for Christmas. But underneath every fight was the same question, do you see me? The real me, one fight, about 2 years into our marriage, was so bad I packed a bag. The trigger was stupid. He had invited his coworkers over for dinner without asking me. And I panicked because I didn't know how to make American food. But the real fight was about feeling invisible. I screamed in English, then switched to my language without realizing it. He stood there helpless and finally said, "I don't know what you're saying, but I know you're hurting. So just tell me slowly, I'll wait." And that word slowly broke something open in me. Because in our fast-paced world, nobody wants to wait. Nobody wants to sit through your broken sentences, your searching for words, your awkward pauses. But he did. He waited. And in that waiting, I realized something important. Love is not about fluency. Love is about patience. It's about being willing to misunderstand each other 10 times in order to understand each other once. Our first year of marriage was a series of beautiful disasters. I cooked pho for his family and they didn't know how to eat it. He brought me to a Thanksgiving dinner and I cried because the turkey was so dry. We argued about air conditioning. I wanted it off to save money. He wanted it on to sleep. We argued about shoes in the house, about tipping at restaurants, about why Americans smile at strangers and why that felt fake to me. But slowly, over time, we built a third culture, not his, not mine, but ours. We learned to eat pho with a fork sometimes, and turkey with fish sauce. We learned that when I say fine, I mean not fine. And when he says fine, he actually means fine. We learned that love lives in the translation, not despite it. And the biggest lesson, the climate didn't matter. The weather in Ohio, the freezing winters, the humid summers, the sudden storms eventually became familiar. But more than that, the emotional climate of our marriage became safe enough for me to make mistakes, safe enough for him to admit he didn't understand. Safe enough for us to sit across from each other with a tax form, laughing at how far we come. Because here's the truth that no romance movie will tell you. Cultural differences don't disappear when you fall in love. They become louder. They demand to be heard. But if you're lucky, if you're patient, they also become the most interesting part of your story. The heat of that Vietnamese wedding is still a memory I hold like a stone in my pocket. But now, when I think of it, I don't think of sweat and panic. I think of my husband fanning himself with that program, looking at me like I was the only cool thing in the room. And I think, if we survive that weather, we can survive anything, even taxes, even language. Even the slow, beautiful work of becoming ourselves in a country that wasn't built for us. The slow English listening habit that saved me. You know what's funny about panic? It makes you do the exact opposite of what works. When I was drowning in English, those years of frozen smiles and half-understood conversations, I tried everything. I downloaded apps that beeped at me when I got an answer wrong. I bought grammar workbooks that used words like pluperfect and subjunctive. I forced myself to watch the news at normal speed, rewinding every 30 seconds until my head throbbed and my eyes burned. None of it worked. In fact, it made things worse. Because every time I failed a quiz or missed a word on TV, my brain added another brick to the wall between me and fluency. The voice inside got louder. See? You're not improving. You're not trying hard enough. Maybe you're just not good at languages. That voice, as I later learned, is called the inner critic. And the inner critic loves speed. It loves deadlines, test scores, comparisons, and the quiet humiliation of falling behind. But here's the secret that changed my life. Your brain doesn't learn language through speed. It learns through safety, repetition, and emotional connection. And the most powerful tool I found, the one that pulled me out of that spiral, was so simple that I almost dismissed it as stupid. I call it the slow English listening habit, and it started on a random Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after that IRS letter landed on my fridge. I was folding laundry, feeling sorry for myself, when my daughter ran into the room carrying a picture book. "Read to me, Mommy," she said. And I almost said no, because reading aloud in English still scared me. What if I mispronounced giraffe? What if she laughed? But she climbed onto my lap and handed me the book, and I had no choice. So I started reading slowly, painfully slowly. I sounded out each word like a first grader. I paused between sentences. I repeated lines when I stumbled. And here's the thing, my daughter didn't complain. She just listened, her head against my chest, her eyes following the pictures. After 20 minutes, I had read only 6 pages. But for the first time in years, I wasn't anxious. I wasn't racing. I was just there in the story. With her, that night, I had a crazy idea. What if I recorded myself reading that same book, slowly, with long pauses, and listened to it while I cooked dinner? What if I didn't try to understand every word? What if I just let the sounds wash over me, like music? I did it the next day, and the day after. By the 3rd day, something strange happened. I found myself saying phrases from the book without thinking, not memorized. They just came out. My mouth knew them before my brain did. That's when I discovered the science behind slow listening. You see, your brain has something called the phonological loop. It's a part of your working memory that holds onto sounds for a few seconds, like a sticky note for your ears. When you listen to something slow and repeated, that loop has time to pass the sounds to your long-term memory. But when you listen at normal speed, or worse, sped up, the loop gets overwhelmed. It drops most of the sounds you hear, but you don't process. That's why you can watch an entire movie in English and remember only 3 words. Your brain was too busy surviving to learn, but slow listening. Slow listening is like feeding your brain with a spoon. It's gentle, it's patient, it works. I started applying this habit to everything. Instead of watching the news at full speed, I found podcasts that spoke clearly and slowly. Instead of reading articles, I listened to audiobooks at 0.75x speed. Instead of cramming vocabulary, I chose one story, my own story, and listened to it again and again until the words felt like old friends. And here's the beautiful part. I didn't need to study grammar. I didn't need flashcards. I just needed to listen to the same sentences slowly while I did dishes or folded laundry or walked to the store. After 2 weeks, my husband noticed. "You're mumbling to yourself," he said, laughing. "Are you okay?" I was mumbling phrases from the picture book. The giraffe has a long neck. The giraffe eats leaves. The giraffe is my friend. Simple, stupid, but mine. After a month, I started speaking more. Not perfectly, my accent was still thick, my grammar still messy, but I stopped freezing. The words came slower than I wanted, but they came. And after 3 months, I did something I had never done before. I called the IRS helpline. Not because I had to, because I wanted to see if I could. A real person answered. I spoke slowly, carefully, and asked about a form I didn't understand. She was patient. She repeated things when I asked. And when we hung up, I sat there shaking, not from fear, but from joy. I had done it. I had used English to solve a real problem. And no app, no textbook, no late-night cram session had gotten me there. It was the slow English listening habit. The habit that told my brain, you're safe. There's no rush. We have all the time we need. Let me be honest with you. Most English learning advice is built for people who already feel confident. It assumes you can handle mistakes, that you can laugh at yourself, that you have thick skin. But if you're an immigrant, a refugee, or just someone who's been hurt by embarrassment, that advice feels like a punch. What you need is not more pressure. What you need is permission to be slow. Permission to listen to the same sentence 50 times. Permission to sound like a child, because sounding like a child is how children learn, and children learn faster than any adult I know. So here is my challenge to you. Starting today, pick one short story. It can be my story, or a fairy tale, or even a recipe. Listen to it slowly. Don't try to understand everything. Just let the sounds in. Repeat it tomorrow. And the next day, and the next. Do not test yourself. Do not take notes. Just listen. I promise you, within 2 weeks, something will shift. The words will start to feel familiar. Your mouth will want to join in, and one day, without warning, you will open your mouth and a sentence will come out whole, correct, yours. That is not magic. That is the slow English listening habit. And it saved me. It can save you too. First job, first paycheck, first confusion. 6 months after that slow listening habit took root, something unexpected happened. I got a job. Not a career, not a dream position, just a small part-time gig at a local library, shelving books and helping with children's story time. The interview was terrifying. 3 people staring at me while I stumbled through answers about my attention to detail and passion for literacy. But I got the job, probably because I was the only applicant willing to work weekends. And on my first day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Real, quiet, earned pride. I showed up early, wore my professional cardigan, and smiled at everyone. For a few hours, I almost forgot I was an immigrant. I was just a person with a name tag and a to-do list. Then the first paycheck came. It arrived via email, a PDF attachment with a subject line that said pay statement, please review. I opened it eagerly, expecting to see the number we had agreed upon, $15 an hour, 20 hours a week, $300 before taxes. But the number at the bottom, the one labeled net pay, was much smaller, $230-something. My heart dropped. I scanned the document, looking for a mistake. That's when I saw the words, federal withholding, Social Security, Medicare, state tax. Each one had a number next to it, subtracting from my hard-earned money like silent thieves. I felt that old familiar panic rising in my chest, the one that made me want to hide under the covers and pretend this wasn't happening. But instead of freezing, I did something new. I took a deep breath, opened my notebook, and wrote down every unfamiliar word, withholding, FICA, W-4, allowances, deductions. I didn't understand any of them. But I was no longer the woman who ran from confusion. I was the woman who sat with it slowly, like a puzzle. That night, I spread the paycheck across the kitchen table and called my husband over. Explain this to me like I'm 5, I said. He smiled, that smile he gets when he's proud of me, and sat down. Okay, he said. Withholding is when the government takes a little bit from each paycheck so you don't have to pay a huge lump sum at tax time. Think of it like saving for a big bill, except you don't have a choice. I frowned. So they're stealing my money. No, he laughed. They're holding it for you, like a parent holding your allowance so you don't spend it all on candy. But I'm not a child, I know. But the government treats everyone like children when it comes to taxes. It's annoying, but it's also kind of protective in a weird way. Then he explained FICA Federal Insurance Contributions Act, which sounded like a boring law but turned out to be money for Social Security and Medicare. You're paying for old people's healthcare and your own future retirement, he said. It's like a very slow, very impersonal savings account. And the W-4. That was the form I had filled out on my first day, the one with all the numbers I didn't understand. I had just copied what my coworker wrote. That form tells your employer how much to withhold, he explained. If you fill it out wrong, you might owe money later or get a smaller refund. I stared at the numbers again, $230 from $300. Almost $70 gone, just like that. For a moment, I felt cheated. I had worked those 20 hours. I had shelved hundreds of books, wiped glue off the craft tables, read Goodnight Moon so many times I could recite it in my sleep. And now the government was taking a piece of my work, my time, my effort. But then I remembered what my husband had said months ago about taxes being like love letters, and I looked at that paycheck differently. $70. That $70 would help pay for the roads I drove on, the library I worked in, the schools my children attended, the parks where we played on Saturdays. It wasn't theft. It was membership. It was my name written in numbers on the ledger of this country. I still didn't like losing the money. I'm not a saint. But something shifted in me that night. For the first time, I understood that paying taxes wasn't just about fear or obligation. It was about participation, about being part of a system that, for all its flaws, had welcomed me. That paycheck, small as it was proof that I could earn money here, contribute here, belong here. The next day at work, I asked my boss for a blank W-4 form. I took it home and filled it out slowly, reading every line, asking my husband about every box. It took me 2 hours. But when I handed it in, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done it. I had faced the confusing English of taxes, and I had won not by being perfect, but by being patient. And here's the lesson I want you to take from this. Whether you're learning English or starting a new job or just trying to survive in a new country, confusion is not failure. Confusion is the doorway to understanding. Every time you don't know a word, withholding, FICA, deduction, that's not proof that you're behind. That's your brain asking for a story. And once you give it that story, once you connect the word to something real, like saving for retirement, like building roads, like saying I'm part of this place, the word sticks. Not because you memorized it, but because you lived it. So if you're looking at your own paycheck or tax form right now, feeling that same tightness in your chest, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me. You don't need to understand everything today. You just need to understand one thing. Write it down. Ask someone. Listen to the explanation slowly twice, 3 times. And tomorrow, learn another thing. That's how I went from hiding from the IRS to proudly filing my first tax return. Not in a day, not in a week. One word, one form, one paycheck at a time. The night we filled out forms together. It was a Friday night in early March, and instead of watching a movie or ordering takeout, my husband and I sat on opposite ends of our worn-out couch, surrounded by papers. W to South, 1099s, receipts, a calculator with low battery, and at least 3 pens that didn't work. The scene looked like something from a comedy about adulting, except neither of us was laughing. I had finally gathered the courage to file my first U.S. tax return, but courage, as it turns out, doesn't make the numbers any clearer. The form in front of me was called a 1040NR, which I later learned stood for non-resident alien. Even the name made me feel like an outsider. Alien, like I had arrived in a spaceship instead of a cramped airplane seat. My husband was working on his own return, a simple one, he said, because his job just took the taxes out automatically. But mine was different. I had worked part-time at the library, done some freelance translating online, and received a small gift from my parents back home. Did gifts count as income? I had no idea. The IRS instructions said something about foreign gifts over a certain amount, but the amount was written in a paragraph so dense with legalese that I felt my eyes glaze over after 3 lines. That's when the old panic started to creep in. My chest tightened. My palms got sweaty. And the voice, the one I thought I had silenced, whispered, "You're not smart enough for this. You should have asked someone else to do it. You're going to make a mistake and they'll fine you and it will be your fault." I put down my pen and stared at the wall. My husband noticed. He always notices. "Hey," he said softly. "What's going on? I can't do this," I whispered. "There's too many words I don't know." Adjusted gross income. Itemized deductions, tax liability. It's like they designed this form to make immigrants feel stupid. He put his own papers aside and moved closer to me. "Okay, new plan. We're not going to fill this out separately. We're going to do it together. One line at a time, like we're building IKEA furniture." I hate IKEA furniture, me too, but we always figure it out, eventually. So we started. Line 1, wages, salaries, tips. That was easy. I copied the number from my W-2. Line 2, taxable interest. I didn't have any. Line 3, ordinary dividends. No. Line 4, distributions from IRAs. "What is an IRA, individual retirement account?" he explained. "You don't have one yet. We moved on." Line 5, pensions and annuities. No. Line 6, Social Security benefits. No. Line 7, capital gains or losses. "What are capital gains?" I asked. "Money you make from selling things like stocks or property." I sold an old couch on Facebook Marketplace for $40. He laughed. "Technically, yes. But the IRS doesn't care about that amount. We're fine." Every line was a small battle. Some I won quickly. Others required him to explain things twice, sometimes 3 times, using different words each time until one finally clicked. "Tax liability," he said at one point, "is just the total amount of tax you owe. Think of it as the bill before you pay." But I already paid withholding. "Right, so if your withholding is more than your liability, you get a refund. If it's less, you owe." So why don't they just take the exact amount? Because they don't know exactly how much you'll earn or what deductions you'll have. So they estimate, and then you settle up now. I sighed. This feels like a game where the rules are written in invisible ink. That's the most accurate description of U.S. taxes I've ever heard. Around 10 p.m., we hit the section about deductions. Standard deduction or itemized. I had no idea what either meant. He explained that the standard deduction is a fixed amount the government lets you subtract from your income, a gift, basically, because they assume everyone has some expenses. Itemized is when you list every single expense, like medical bills or charitable donations, and subtract those instead. For most people, he said, the standard deduction is bigger and easier. So just take that. But what if I want to itemize? Do you have thousands of dollars in medical bills or charity receipts? No, then take the standard. I took the standard. Then came the moment of truth. After all the additions and subtractions, the form asked for the final number, amount you or refund you get. I held my breath while my husband did the math on the calculator. He punched the numbers slowly, double-checking each one. Then he looked up and smiled. You're getting a refund. How much? $142. I blinked. That's not a lot. No, he agreed, but it's yours, and it means you overpaid. Which means you gave the government an interest-free loan for a year. Congratulations, you're a real taxpayer. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. I sat there on the couch, surrounded by crumpled papers and dead pens, crying over $142. But I wasn't crying about the money. I was crying because I had done it. I had faced the monster under the bed, the IRS, the English, the fear, and I had won. Not heroically, not gracefully. Slowly, awkwardly, with my husband reading definitions off his phone and me asking stupid questions. But we finished. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The forms weren't just forms. They were a record of my first year as a real participant in this country. Every number told a story. The W from the library said you worked here. You helped children learn to read. You belonged. The freelance income said your skills have value, even in a second language. And the refund, small as it was, said the system is not perfect, but it sees you. It's giving something back. That night, after we sealed the envelope and wrote the address to the IRS, my husband kissed my forehead and said, "I'm proud of you." Not because you did your taxes, because you didn't give up. And I realized that's what learning English and building a life in a new country really is. Not a sprint, not a test. Just a series of Friday nights, sitting on a couch with someone who believes in you, filling out forms one line at a time. Why tax felt like pride, not pain. The envelope was in the mailbox. That's all it took. One white envelope addressed to the IRS, with a stamp my husband had licked and pressed down firmly because I was too nervous to do it myself. I had dropped it in the blue box outside the post office on a windy Tuesday morning, and for 3 weeks, I tried not to think about it. But on the day the refund arrived, a direct deposit into our joint account, $142 and some cents, I didn't feel relief. I felt something much stranger. I felt proud. Not the loud kind of proud, not the look at me proud, the quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest like a warm stone and makes you breathe a little deeper. I was driving home from work when I checked my phone at a red light and saw the deposit notification. I pulled over into a grocery store parking lot, put the car in park, and just sat there, staring at the number $142, less than what I had spent on groceries that week. But it wasn't the amount that mattered. It was what that number represented. Every line of that tax form had been a small victory over fear. Every unfamiliar word, withholding, deduction, liability, had been a wall I climbed, not around, but through. And now the government was sending me money back. Not because they were generous, because I had overpaid. Because I had earned enough to owe taxes in the first place. Because I had worked legally in this country, and the system had recorded my labor and returned what was mine. That's when the tears came. Not sad tears, not even happy tears, exactly. They were the tears of someone who had been lost and finally found a map. Someone who had been holding their breath for 3 years and finally exhaled. I sat there in my beat-up Honda Civic, the one with the broken air conditioner and the stain on the back seat from a melted popsicle. And I cried for all the versions of myself that had almost given up. The woman in the Walmart frozen aisle. The mother nodding through the parent-teacher conference. The bride sweating through her wedding dress in Vietnamese July. All of them were still inside me, and all of them were finally quiet, because now I had proof. Not hope, not faith, not someone else's reassuring words, but proof. A deposit slip, digital and cold, that said, "You belong here." You paid for the roads you drive on. You paid for the library where you work. You paid for the school where your children learn their ABCs. You are not a guest. You are not a burden. You are a participant. I know that sounds dramatic. It's only taxes, right? Millions of people file every year without a second thought. But for an immigrant, especially one who learned English late, especially one who grew up in a country where taxes were something the government took and you never saw again, this was a ceremony. A ritual of belonging. My husband had called it a love letter, and I finally understood what he meant. A love letter doesn't have to be romantic. It just has to be honest, You write down what you have, what you've earned, what you can give. You send it off into a big, messy, imperfect system. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the system writes back. In this case, it wrote back with $142 and a note that said, "We owe you." That phrase hit me harder than anything else. We owe you, the IRS. That faceless monster I had feared for so long was admitting that it had taken more than its share, that I had given, and now it was time to give back. That's what pride felt like, not winning. Not being better than anyone else, just being seen. Just having your contribution acknowledged, even if only by a computer algorithm in some government building in Kansas City. I thought about my first year in America, the late night studying English while my husband slept, the shame of mispronouncing library and having a kind stranger correct me, the joy of my first solo phone call to the electricity company when I successfully argued about a bill. All of those moments led to this one, sitting in a parking lot, crying over a tax refund, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Because here's the truth that no one tells you about immigration. It's not the big milestones that heal you. It's not the citizenship ceremony or the green card or the first job. It's the small, boring, bureaucratic moments when you realize you become ordinary. You've stopped being the foreigner who needs help and started being the person who files their taxes like everyone else. Ordinariness is a gift. It means you've arrived. It means the emergency is over. I wiped my face, started the car, and drove home. When I walked through the door, my husband was making dinner, something with chicken and rice that smelled like home. The kids were drawing at the table. Normal, boring, perfect. How was work? He asked. Good, I said. I got my refund. He looked up, smiled, and said, told you. Love letter. I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling too. Because he was right. That tax return was a letter I had written to America in slow, careful English, saying, I am here. I am trying. I am contributing. And America had written back, in numbers instead of words, saying, we see you. We owe you. Welcome home. If you are watching this and you haven't filed your first tax return yet, or you're still afraid of that envelope from the IRS, let me tell you something from the other side. The fear is real. The confusion is real. But on the other side of that fear is a feeling you might not expect, not relief, pride. The pride of having done something hard, something adult, something that proves you belong. And that pride, small, quiet, tucked inside a deposit notification, is worth every sleepless night. It is worth every awkward conversation, every mispronounced word, every moment you wanted to give up. Because pride is not about being perfect. Pride is about showing up, and you, my friend, are showing up. Every day, even when it's hard. Even when you're tired, that's not nothing. That's everything. From I can't to let me try slowly. The morning after I saw that refund deposit, I did something I had never done before. I sat down with a blank notebook and wrote the truth. I still can't speak English well. But I just did my taxes, so maybe can't is a liar. That sentence became the title of my 90-day experiment. 90 days to go from the woman who froze at the cashier to the woman who could call the IRS without a script. 90 days to prove to myself that slow English listening wasn't just a cozy habit, it was a weapon against fear. I didn't tell many people about this experiment. My husband knew, of course, because he lived with my sudden obsession. My kids knew because they caught me whispering to myself while folding laundry. But I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't announce it to my coworkers because I was terrified of failing publicly. Failure privately was bad enough, so I made a simple plan. Every day, I would listen to one story in English slowly at 0.75x speed for 20 minutes. The story had to be mine or someone's real-life story because fake dialogues made my brain fall asleep. I would repeat 3 key sentences aloud, like a child learning to speak. And at the end of each week, I would record myself telling a 30-second version of what I had learned. No editing, no second takes. Just my voice, raw and flawed, saved on my phone. Week 1 was humiliating. I listened to a recording of myself reading a picture book, the same one I had read to my daughter, and my accent was so thick I barely understood myself. The word library came out library. Squirrel was impossible. I said squirrel with an extra syllable that didn't exist. I wanted to delete everything and pretend the experiment never happened. But I had written 90 days on the calendar, and I'm stubborn. So I kept going. Week 2, something shifted. I started noticing patterns. Not grammar rules, I still couldn't tell you what a past participle is, but rhythms. The way Americans raise their pitch at the end of a question. The way they swallow the T in mountain so it sounds like mountain. I imitated those sounds in the shower, in the car, while chopping onions. My kids caught me and laughed. Mom, you sound funny, my daughter said. I know, I said, but I'm trying. Week 3, I got brave. I called the library to ask about my schedule. A real phone call with a real person, no text in front of me. My hands shook as I dialed. The librarian said hello, and I said slowly, carefully, "Hi, this is Lynn. I work at the children's desk. I wanted to check if my shift tomorrow is still at 10. There was a pause. My heart pounded. Then she said, "Oh, hi Lynn. Yes, 10 is fine. See you then." That was it. 30 seconds, no confusion, no panic. I hung up and sat there, stunned. I had done it, not perfectly, not quickly, but I had done it. Week 4, I added a new rule. 1 real conversation per week with a stranger. Not a deep conversation, just ordering coffee, asking for directions, returning an item at the store each time. I felt the old fear rise. Each time, I told myself, you can do hard things slowly. And each time, I survived. By week 6, the fear started to shrink. It didn't disappear. It just became smaller, like a barking dog behind a fence instead of a wolf in the room. I could walk past it without freezing. I could say, "I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?" Without feeling ashamed. Week 8 was the test. I had to call the IRS again, not for taxes this time, but to ask about a missing form for my daughter's school. The hold music played for 7 minutes. I rehearsed my sentences in a whisper. When the agent came on, I spoke slowly, clearly, and she understood everything. She even complimented my English. "You're doing great," she said. "Most people are much harder to understand." I almost cried on the phone. Week 10, I started speaking English at home. Not all the time, just small things. "Can you pass the salt? What time is dinner?" "I love you," my husband noticed. "You're not translating in your head anymore," he said. "You're just talking." He was right. The internal translator, the one that had slowed me down for years, was finally taking a nap. Week 12, day 90, I recorded my final video. I sat in the same spot on the couch where I had once hidden from the IRS envelope. I pressed record on my phone and said, "My name is Lynn." 3 months ago, I couldn't call a library without shaking. Today, I filed my taxes, argued with the billing department, and read my daughter a bedtime story without stumbling. I'm not fluent, but I'm not afraid anymore. And that's enough. I watched the video back. My accent was still there, my grammar was still messy, but my eyes were steady, my voice was calm. And I realized that the goal had never been perfection. The goal had been presence, the ability to be in a conversation without running away, the right to take up space in English, even if my sentences were slow and my words were simple. Here's what the 90 days taught me. Your brain is not a computer. You can't upload a language and expect it to run perfectly. Your brain is a garden. You plant seeds, words, phrases, rhythms, and you water them with patience. Some seeds grow fast. Some take months. Some never grow at all, and that's fine. You plant different seeds, The science backs this up. Research on neuroplasticity shows that language learning happens best when you're not stressed, when you repeat things at a comfortable pace. When you connect new sounds to emotions, my 90-day experiment wasn't magic. It was just applied neuroscience with a lot of mistakes. So if you're watching this and you've been telling yourself I can for years, I want you to try something. Write down one small thing you're afraid to do in English. Just one. Maybe it's ordering a sandwich. Maybe it's asking for directions. Maybe it's calling a helpline. Then break that thing into tiny steps. Step 1. Listen to someone else do it slowly. Step 2. Repeat the key sentence 5 times in the shower. Step 3. Try it with a friend. Step 4. Try it for real. Do not move to step 4 until step 3 feels boring. Boredom is the sign that your brain is ready. That's how I went from I can't to let me try slowly. Not by jumping, by stepping, one small, boring, repetitive step at a time. And on the other side of those 90 days, I wasn't a different person. I was still me, still anxious, still imperfect, still sometimes confused. But I was a me who had proof that slow works. Proof that fear is loud, but not strong. Proof that can't is just a word you haven't challenged yet. So here's my challenge to you. Start today, not tomorrow, not next week, today. Pick one sentence from this video, just one, and say it out loud 5 times, slowly, badly, with your accent and your mistakes. That's not failure. That's the first seed, and seeds, if you water them, grow. The kids, the chaos, the unexpected gift. Just when I thought I had figured out this slow English thing, the listening, the repeating, the courage to make mistakes, my own children became my teachers. And let me tell you, they are ruthless. My daughter, who is 6, corrects my pronunciation like a tiny drill sergeant. Mom, it's not paschetti, it's spaghetti. Say it with me, spaghetti. My son, who is 8, interrupts my phone calls to whisper, you said borrow, but you meant lend. I want to be annoyed, but I can't, because they are right. And because they are the reason my English has grown faster in the past 2 years than in the previous 10. Here's the unexpected gift of having children in a new country. They don't care about your pride. They don't care that you're an adult with a degree and a career. They just need you to understand them, and they need to understand you. So they teach not with textbooks or lesson plans. With chaos, with love, with the brutal honesty of a 6-year-old who has no filter. I remember the first time my daughter came home from school crying. She had drawn a picture of our family of 4 stick figures under a rainbow, and the teacher had asked her to describe it. My mom is from Vietnam, she had said. She speaks English like a robot. The other kids laughed. My daughter cried. I cried too, later, when she told me, but then I did something I had never done before. I sat down with her and said, you're right. Mommy does sound like a robot sometimes. But robots can learn. Do you want to help me? She nodded, wiping her nose. And from that day on, we had a new routine. Every afternoon, after school, we would sit on the floor with her picture books. She would read a page. Then I would repeat it slowly while she listened. If I said a word wrong, she would shake her head and say, try again. No judgment. Just patience. Just the pure, uncomplicated belief that I could get it right if I kept trying. My son's teaching style is different. He is quieter, more analytical. He likes to write words on sticky notes and put them on objects around the house. Refrigerator on the fridge. Stove on the stove. Microwave on the microwave. For weeks, I lived in a house covered in yellow squares, each one a tiny lesson. One day, he added a sticky note to my forehead. It said, Mom. I laughed so hard I cried, but I never forgot that word, obviously. What I learned from my children is that language is not a subject. It's not something you study and then put away. Language is how you say I love you at bedtime. It's how you ask what happened at school today. It's how you explain that no, We cannot have ice cream for dinner, even if you ask in the saddest voice possible. And children, unlike adults, are not afraid to make mistakes. They babble. They invent words. They say sheeps instead of sheep and run instead of ran. And nobody laughs at them, not really, because everyone knows that's how learning works. But adults are terrified of looking foolish. We want to sound perfect from the first sentence. And that fear is the real enemy, not the grammar. Not the vocabulary, the fear. My children don't have that fear. So I started watching them, how they learned, how they listened to a new word, repeated it a few times, and then used it confidently even if it was wrong. They didn't wait until they were ready. They just tried, and if they failed, they tried again. That became my new rule. Act like a 6-year-old. Try, fail, try again. Don't apologize. One afternoon, I was making lunch and my daughter asked, "Mom, what's your favorite English word?" I thought about it. Refund, I said. She laughed. That's a weird favorite word, maybe, I said. But it means the government gave me back my money, and that made me feel like I belong here. She didn't understand the politics, but she understood the feeling. Because she, too, was learning what it meant to belong in a country that wasn't her parents' home country. She was born here, so she is American by birth, but she is also Vietnamese by blood. And sometimes she feels caught between two worlds, just like me. The difference is that she has no shame about it. She switches languages mid-sentence. She mixes grammar rules. She invents hybrid words that only our family understands. And she is happy. That's the real gift, not the language skills, the happiness. The freedom to be imperfect. My children gave me permission to stop pretending, to stop hiding my accent behind a smile, to say, I'm still learning, without feeling small. And in return, I gave them something too. I gave them a mother who tries, who stumbles, who gets back up. Who reads bedtime stories slowly, mispronouncing giraffe every single time, but never skipping a page. Last week, my son came home with a school assignment. He had to write about someone he admires. He wrote about me. My mom came from Vietnam, he wrote. She didn't know English, but she learned. And now she does taxes and talks on the phone and reads me stories. She is brave. I kept that paper in my wallet. I still have it. When I feel scared or stupid or tired, I take it out and read it. She is brave. Not perfect, brave. That's what I want for you, too. Not fluency without mistakes, but the bravery to make mistakes out loud. The bravery to let your children hear you stumble, so they learn that stumbling is part of growing. The bravery to be the student, even when you're supposed to be the parent. Because here's the truth that no English class will teach you. The best teachers are often the smallest people in your life. They don't care about your past failures. They don't grade your grammar. They just want to connect with you. And when you let them teach you, when you swallow your pride and let a 6-year-old correct your pronunciation, you don't just learn English. You learn humility. You learn play. You learn that love is the best language teacher of all. So if you have children, or nieces, or nephews, or neighbors with kids, find a moment this week to let them teach you one word. One silly, simple word. Say it wrong. Let them laugh. Say it again. I promise you, that memory will stick longer than any flashcard. And years from now, when you speak English without thinking, you'll remember who helped you get there. For me, it was a girl who loves spaghetti and a boy who loves sticky notes. For you, it might be someone just as small, just as honest, just as brave. What slow English reading taught me about marriage. You would think that learning to file taxes and speak slowly to customer service representatives would be the peak of my English journey. But the most unexpected lesson came from a fight. A stupid fight, the kind that starts over dirty dishes and escalates into you never listen to me. We were standing in the kitchen, my husband and I, 10 o'clock at night, both exhausted from work and parenting and life. He had left his coffee mug on the counter instead of putting it in the dishwasher. I had snapped at him. He had snapped back. And within minutes, we were yelling not about the mug anymore, but about everything. About how I felt invisible, about how he felt unappreciated, about how we had somehow become roommates instead of partners. In the middle of my angry sentence, I stopped. Not because I ran out of words, but because I heard myself. I was speaking fast, too fast. The same panicked, jumbled speed I used to use when I was trying to survive an English conversation. And I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't fighting fair, I was fighting scared. That's when I did something I had never done before in an argument. I took a breath, looked at my husband, and said, "Can we slow down?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What? Slow down?" I repeated. Like when I'm learning English, when I listen to a story at 0.75 speed. Can we do that? Can we say one thing at a time, and then wait, and then the other person responds? He was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "Okay. You go first." So I did. I spoke slowly, carefully, choosing my words the way I chose them when I was reading aloud to my daughter. Not perfect words, but honest ones. I am tired. I feel like I do most of the housework. And when you leave your mug on the counter, it feels like you don't see all the work I already did. That's what hurts. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he said, slowly too, "I didn't know. I thought you wanted me to just put it in the sink. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just distracted." We went back and forth like that for 20 minutes. Slow, one sentence at a time. No interrupting, no raising voices, no bringing up old fights. And by the end, we weren't fixed, but we weren't enemies anymore. We were two people, sitting at the kitchen table, trying to understand each other. That night, I realized something profound. The same skills I had learned for English, slowing down, repeating, asking for clarification, tolerating imperfection, were exactly the skills my marriage needed. Think about it. When you're learning a new language, you have to assume good intentions. You have to believe that the person you're talking to wants to understand you, even when you're struggling. You have to be willing to say, "I don't get it. Can you say it another way?" And you have to accept that miscommunication is normal, not a sign of failure. Why don't we treat marriage the same way? Why do we expect our partners to read our minds, to speak the same emotional language fluently, to never misunderstand? That's unrealistic. That's like expecting someone to learn English in a week. It doesn't work. What works is patience, repetition, the willingness to say, "What I heard was X, did you mean X?" And then listen, really listen. Not while planning your rebuttal, but while being curious about what the other person is actually saying. The science backs this up too. Psychologists call it active listening, repeating back what you heard, asking open-ended questions, giving your full attention. It sounds simple, but in practice, it's as hard as learning a new language. Because your brain wants to react, not respond. Your brain wants to defend, not understand. That's why slow English reading taught me to be a better wife. Because every time I sat with a difficult sentence, repeating it until it made sense, looking up words I didn't know, accepting that understanding takes time, I was training the same muscle I needed in marriage. The muscle of patience, the muscle of curiosity, the muscle of grace. I started applying the slow listening habit to my relationship. When my husband said something that hurt me, instead of snapping back, I would say, "Can you say that again?" but slower. I want to make sure I understand. Sometimes he would roll his eyes, but mostly he would try. And the second time, his words would come out softer, clearer, more thoughtful. Because slowing down forces you to choose your words carefully. It's hard to be mean in slow motion. We also started a new ritual. Every Sunday night, we sit on the couch for 15 minutes and practice slow talking, no phones, no TV. We each share one thing that went well that week and one thing that was hard. We speak slowly. We don't interrupt. When one of us finishes, the other repeats what they heard before responding. So what I'm hearing is that you felt lonely on Wednesday because I worked late. Is that right? Yes, that's right. It feels awkward at first, artificial, like we're actors in a self-help video. But over time, it became natural, because the awkwardness is just the feeling of a new habit forming. The same way my tongue felt clumsy with spaghetti at first, but now it rolls off without thinking. The same way my ears struggle to hear withholding, but now I can say it in my sleep. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes familiar. And familiar is where love lives. I'm not saying my marriage is perfect now. We still fight. We still misunderstand each other. Last week, we had a 20-minute argument about whether to paint the bathroom blue or gray, which was really about feeling unheard. But in the middle of that argument, I stopped and said, I'm going to pretend I'm learning English right now. Can we start over? He laughed, despite being angry, and we started over, slower. That's the gift of being a slow English learner. You get to bring that slowness into every part of your life. You get to be the person who says, wait, I need a moment, without shame. You get to be the person who asks for clarification, who repeats things back, who refuses to let misunderstanding harden into resentment. Because you know, from painful experience, that understanding takes time. And that time is not wasted. It's the most loving thing you can give. So if you're watching this and your relationships feel strained, whether with a partner, a parent, a child, or a friend, try this. Tomorrow, in your next conversation, slow down. Speak at 0.75 speed. Ask them to do the same. Repeat what you heard. Say, can you say that differently? Don't worry about sounding weird. You've sounded weird in English before, and you survived. You can sound weird in love too, and maybe, just maybe, the person on the other side will feel something unexpected. Not frustration, not impatience, but relief, because they've been waiting for someone to slow down and really hear them. Just like you've been waiting for someone to slow down and really hear your English. We're all immigrants here, immigrants to each other's inner worlds. And the only passport that works is patience. A happy ending that keeps going. It is April again. The sky is that soft California blue that makes you believe in fresh starts. I am sitting at the same kitchen table where I once cried over a 1040 in our form, but everything has changed. Not the table. That table is still wobbly and stained with marker drawings from my kids. What changed is me. This morning, I filed my taxes for the third time, alone, without my husband hovering with a calculator. Without a translation app open on my phone. Just me, a cup of tea, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The form took 45 minutes, which is probably slow by American standards. But I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. When I came to a word I didn't recognize, estimated tax payments, I didn't spiral. I just opened the IRS website, found the definition, read it slowly, and moved on. Because that's what slow English learners do. We don't run from confusion. We sit with it. We give it a cup of tea and ask it to explain itself. After I hit submit, I walked outside and stood in the sunshine. My daughter was drawing with chalk on the driveway. My son was practicing his soccer kicks against the garage door. My husband was inside making pancakes, his Saturday tradition, the one he learned from his own father. And I thought about how different this moment was from that first tax season. 3 years ago, I was hiding in the bathroom. 3 years ago, I was convinced I didn't belong. 3 years ago, I heard IRS and felt my heart drop into my stomach. Now I hear taxes and I think, love letter. Not because the government is kind or the forms are easy. Because filing my taxes is proof that I'm here, that I work, that I earn, that I give. And that I receive a refund, a service, a community. My daughter ran up to me, her hands covered in pink chalk dust. Mom, are you done with your tax thing? Yes, I said. Did you get money back? A little. Can we buy ice cream? I laughed. We'll see. That's the other thing that changed. I can laugh now. About taxes, about my accent, about the time I called the electric company and asked to turn on the light money instead of start service. Mistakes that used to make me want to disappear now make me smile. Not because they're funny, they are, a little, but because they remind me how far I've come. Each mistake is a footprint on a path that was once invisible. The path from fear to pride, from I can't to let me try slowly, from immigrant to neighbor. I'm not saying everything is perfect. Last week, a cashier at the grocery store asked me a question and I didn't understand. She repeated herself twice, then sighed. That still stings. That still makes me feel small for a moment. But the difference is, I don't stay small. I take a breath, say I'm still learning English. Can you say it one more time? And most people do, and the ones who don't. That's their problem, not mine. I've learned that shame is a choice. A heavy, exhausting choice that I don't have to make anymore. I've also learned that pride is not the opposite of humility. Real pride is humility's older sister. She knows she's not perfect. She knows she makes mistakes, but she also knows that trying matters. That showing up every day, even when it's hard, is worth celebrating. That's what my first U.S. tax return gave me. Not money, though the refund was nice. Not confidence, though that grew too. It gave me proof that I could do something hard in English and survive. And once you have that proof, you can do anything. Call the doctor. Argue a bill. Help your child with homework. Make a friend. Fall in love with a language that once felt like an enemy. My husband brought me a pancake outside, shaped like a heart. For my favorite taxpayer, he said, I rolled my eyes but took the plate. You know, I said, when I first moved here, I thought love would be enough. I didn't know I also needed patience and taxes. And sticky notes, he added, and a 6-year-old pronunciation coach. We sat on the steps, eating pancakes, watching our kids play. It wasn't a movie ending. There was no music swelling in the background. Just the sounds of chalk on concrete, a soccer ball hitting the garage door, and two people who had learned to speak to each other slowly. That's the happy ending I didn't expect. Not a finish line, but a continuation. A life where every April, I sit at a wobbly table and fill out forms that say yes, I was here. Yes, I earned this. Yes, I am part of this place. A life where my children grow up watching their mother try, fail, and try again, and learn that trying is the bravest thing a person can do. A life where love letter is not a joke, but a truth. Because that's what this whole journey has been. A letter from me to America, written in slow, careful English, full of misspellings and awkward phrases, but honest. And America wrote back. Not with words, but with a refund slip, with a library card. With a house full of pancake Saturdays and chalk drawings and soccer practice. That's more than I ever hoped for. If you are watching this and you're still afraid of taxes, of English, of belonging, please hear me. The fear is real, I know. I lived in it for years. But on the other side of that fear is not perfection. It's just life. Ordinary, boring, beautiful life. The kind where you file your taxes on a Saturday morning and then eat a heart-shaped pancake. The kind where you mispronounce spaghetti and your daughter corrects you and you both laugh. The kind where you realize, slowly, that you've stopped counting your mistakes and started counting your moments. That's the happy ending. And it's not an ending at all. It's a beginning that keeps beginning. Every time you try, every time you slow down, every time you say, I don't understand, can you help me? Without shame, so go, file your taxes, make your phone call. Read that bedtime story with all the wrong accents. Your children will remember your courage, not your grammar. Your spouse will remember your patience, not your perfection. And you will remember the day you stopped being afraid and started being proud. That day is today. That day is now. You just spent over an hour listening to a woman who once hid from a cashier, who cried over a tax form, who mispronounced spaghetti so many times her own daughter made fun of her. And yet, here you are, still watching, still listening, still trying. Do you know what that means? It means you're already braver than you think. Because the hardest part of learning English isn't grammar or vocabulary. It's not even the IRS. The hardest part is not giving up before the miracle happens, and you haven't given up. That's not nothing. That's everything. So here's what I want you to do before you click away. Take 2 seconds right now and type one word in the comments. Slow. Just that, slow. Because every time you write it, you're telling the algorithm and yourself that slow is not failure. Slow is the secret. Slow is how love works. Slow is how immigrants become neighbors, how marriages survive, how a woman who couldn't say library now files her own taxes and laughs about it. I'm going to keep making these stories real, messy, honest stories at the perfect speed for your ears. But I can only do that if you tell me you want more. So hit subscribe, tap the bell, and next week, I'll tell you a new story about what happened when I finally had to call 911 in English. Spoiler, I survived, but you'll have to subscribe to find out how. Thank you for being here. Thank you for trying. And remember, you don't need to be fast. You just need to be here. Slow and steady wins the language and the life. I'll see you in the next video.